Every decent shooter needs a good variety of enemies to stay fun and engaging. Up until now, my game only had 2 of them, which made things feel repetitive and kinda boring. I knew I had to fix that if I wanted the gameplay to actually be exciting. So, in this devlog, I went all in on creating new, unique and challenging enemies to make the game feel alive. Hey, I am flukydev and I am working on my dream game, an isometric shooter where you defend your RV from waves of enemies in a post-apocalyptic world. Now, this game is all about shooting, and the most important part of any shooter is, of course, the enemies. So, for this update I wanted to focus on adding a bunch of new and challenging enemies to the game. But of course, things are never that easy. Over the last few weeks I added tons of new content, new objects, gameplay mechanics and a completely reworked map generation system. All that made the world look way better, but it also completely broke the enemy's AI. They would spawn inside of objects, get stuck on walls, spin in circles and just lose their minds. My pathfinding system itself still worked fine, but the problem was that my code didn't really account for the new, constantly changing maps. As a result, the enemy's navigation data just didn't match the world anymore. Luckily, this one was an easy fix. I just had to update the enemy's navigation data every time the map changes, like when starting or ending a mission. And with this issue out of the way, it was time for the part you have all been waiting for, adding new enemies. At this point, the only enemies in the game were a basic zombie and a bandit. The zombie just runs straight at the player and attacks, while the bandit carries a gun and shoots from a distance. Together they already make for a really strong core foundation. I decided to focus on the zombies first, since they are kind of the main enemies in the game. The first new one I added was a big slow zombie with a ton of health that basically acts as a tank. It uses the same basic movement system as the regular zombie, but the following enemies will start to become much more interesting. Next, I created a small and fast zombie. This one runs towards the player just like the normal zombie, but every now and then it does these random turns and path changes, making it a lot harder to shoot. It is super unpredictable and way more challenging. Plus, it deals more damage and has more health than the regular zombie. After that, I used this new movement algorithm for another new enemy type, a zombified animal that I call the snapper. It's fast, deals a decent amount of damage and it's surprisingly tanky. The snapper runs around in a really chaotic pattern, constantly changing directions but still slowly getting closer to the player. When it gets close enough, it will suddenly dash in a straight line to attack. All of that makes the snapper extremely dangerous and honestly pretty terrifying to fight. Now, with all these new and interesting zombies, the game features 4 unique enemies that you can encounter during missions. After finishing those, I started adding more bandit variations. Adding more variations here was super easy. I just had to give the bandits different weapons, tweak their attack range and adjust their movement speed. I added a bandit with a rifle and another one with a shotgun, which already adds a ton more variety to the game. But of course I also wanted to introduce something new mechanic wise, so I added the infected bandit. It basically behaves like a standard zombie, but it's a lot harder to handle. The cool part is what happens after it dies. It releases a pool of toxic green liquid around it. If the player steps into it, they will take continuous damage. This creates some really interesting gameplay moments because you suddenly have to be much more careful about where you step during fights. And just like that, the game now has 9 enemies instead of just 2, which makes the missions feel way more dynamic and fun to play. It's no longer that same repetitive run around and shoot everything experience. You actually have to pay attention and pick your fights carefully if you want to survive. Things were looking great, but then a problem appeared. Some enemies were acting weirdly when getting close to the player, especially those with guns. They kept shooting at walls, getting stuck in tight places and glitching around like maniacs. I spent quite some time rewriting their behavior from scratch, until I finally came up with a simple solution that actually worked. Now, enemies with guns act way smarter and more strategic. They will move towards the player and only attack if they are in range and have a clear line of sight. If the player hides behind cover, they will reposition to get a better angle before attacking again. and if you get too close, they will back off to maintain distance. Honestly, I am really proud of this system. It makes the game feel so much more alive and immersive. Apart from adding new enemies, I also spent quite a bit of time improving all kinds of aspects related to the main gameplay loop. One of the biggest changes was adding a proper starter area. I wanted to avoid using a generic main menu, and up until now you would just spawn in an empty, boring area next to the RV. Now there are some houses and streets around, with bushes and streetlights scattered here and there. It's a small addition, but it already makes the game feel much more alive. In the last video I introduced new reward crates that can randomly spawn around the map during missions. These crates act as passive rewards for the player, but even with those, winning a mission still didn't feel rewarding. So, to fix that, I added a big loot container that appears next to the RV whenever you complete a mission objective. It only takes one hit to break and drops 5 random valuable items. These now serve as the main rewards for completing missions, and they make finishing objectives feel a lot more satisfying. A smaller but just as important change I made was adding proper transitions at the beginning and end of missions. Before, the game would just throw you straight out of the RV immediately after selecting a new objective. Now, with these transitions, you actually get to watch the RV drive along the road to your mission location before it begins, which makes it much clearer for the player what's happening. When a mission finishes, you have to make your way back to the RV, and entering it brings you back to the starter area. I am really happy with this feature. It feels like a much needed improvement. I also made some smaller tweaks, like expanding the mission panel so players can actually see what a mission will involve before starting, and improving the item interaction mechanic. And just like that, I have covered everything I managed to get done since the last update. I am honestly really proud of my progress and the development pace I have been able to maintain lately. The new enemies, areas and transitions make the game feel so much more alive and immersive, and I couldn't be happier with how everything is coming together. As I mentioned earlier, my next focus will be on completely remaking the game's look and feel, so make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this video and don't want to miss the next devlog. Also, leave a like and share your thoughts or feedback down in the comments. I would really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you next time.